People talk about trauma as if it fades, like ink on paper. I wish they were right. It's been years since that Christmas Eve, but some nights I still wake up with my heart pounding, sweat soaking the sheets. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, not to us. Marcy was more than a coworker. She was my friend. And while I've told myself 1,000 times that there was nothing I could have done, the truth is, I'll never know for sure. People always want to know what happened when they hear about it. They want the gory details, the drama. But what they don't realize is that it's the quiet moments that haunt me the most. The seconds between breaths. The silence when you realize you're completely alone. If I could forget that night, I would. But stories like this don't just disappear. And neither do people like him. The store was supposed to close at 10 p.m. sharp, but as anyone who's worked retail knows, closing time is a myth. By 10:15, Marcy and I were still ringing up frantic customers, people grabbing last-minute stocking stuffers, cheap toys, and holiday candy that looked like it had been on the shelves since Halloween. "Think they'll let us leave before midnight?" Marcy asked, rolling her eyes as she scanned a box of Christmas lights for the 5th time. "Doubt it," I said, stifling a yawn. It was just the two of us up front. The store was running on a skeleton crew for the holiday, and Tim, the overnight manager, was holed up in the back office, doing God knows what. By 10:30, the last customer shuffled out, and the automatic doors slid shut with an eerie finality. "Finally," Marcy muttered, tossing her scanner onto the counter. "Think we'll make it out of here alive?" Her words hung in the air longer than they should have. We were supposed to clean up before leaving, straighten the shelves, sweep the floors, make sure the registers were ready for the morning crew. But something felt off. "Did you hear that?" Marcy asked, freezing mid-step. I paused, listening. The store was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. "Hear what?" "Never mind," she said, shaking her head. "Probably just my imagination." But as we worked our way through the aisles, the feeling only grew stronger. A misplaced item here, a cart left in the middle of the floor there. It was small stuff you'd normally ignore. But tonight, it felt like something more. We saw him just before 11 p.m. He was standing at the far end of the store near the electronics section. At first, I thought he was a customer we'd missed, but there was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Didn't we lock the doors?" Marcy asked, narrowing her eyes. "Yeah," I said, my throat dry. The man wasn't holding anything. No basket, no cart. He wasn't browsing either. He just stood there, staring at the rows of shelves like he didn't know what he was looking for. "I'll check the back," Marcy said, grabbing the walkie-talkie. "Tim's probably asleep again." "Be careful," I said, though I wasn't sure why. When Marcy didn't come back after 10 minutes, I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the back hallway. The air back there always felt colder, like the heating system didn't quite reach. My footsteps echoed as I walked, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above me. "Marcy?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. The door to the storage room was open, just a crack. I hesitated, the flashlight trembling in my hands. "Marcy?" I pushed the door open, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. The rows of shelves stretched on endlessly, casting long, sinister shadows. That's when I saw it, her name tag lying on the floor. Something was wrong. I picked up the name tag, my pulse racing. "Marcy?" I called again, louder this time. No answer. I took a step forward, the flashlight sweeping across the shelves. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling sound, like someone shifting their weight. "Marcy, this isn't funny," I said, my voice shaking. The sound came again, closer this time. I turned, and that's when I saw him. The man from the electronics section standing between two shelves. He was holding something in his hand. A knife. I didn't think, I just ran. The storage room was a maze of shelves and boxes, and every turn felt like a dead end. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps, steady and deliberate. "Leave me alone," I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls. But he didn't answer. I burst into the main store, the bright lights momentarily blinding me. I ducked behind the counter, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The store was silent again, but I knew he was still there. I peeked over the counter, my eyes scanning the aisles. For a moment, I thought I'd lost him. Then I heard it. The soft scrape of a shoe against the tile floor. He was close. I gripped the flashlight tighter, every muscle in my body tensed. When he appeared, I swung with all my strength. The flashlight connected with his face and he staggered back, cursing. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I bolted for the front doors, praying they weren't locked. The police found me in the parking lot, shaking and barely coherent. They found Marcy in the storage room. She was gone. The man? He disappeared before they arrived. The cameras didn't catch his face, just a shadow moving through the aisles. I quit retail after that night, moved to a different town, changed my phone number, tried to start over. But every Christmas Eve, I leave the lights on, just in case. The weeks that followed blurred together like static. Police officers came and went, their notepads filled with details that didn't seem to matter. "Do you remember anything else about him?" they asked over and over, as if a better description might conjure him from thin air. I didn't. I barely remembered his face, let alone the color of his jacket or his height. All I could remember was the knife, the cold steel glinting under the fluorescent lights. Marcy's parents held a vigil outside the store a week later. I stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling like an intruder. I should have been the one holding a candle, whispering prayers for her soul, but all I could do was stare at her picture on the poster they'd printed. She had the kind of smile that lit up a room. The guilt was unbearable. It seeped into my every waking moment, and the nightmares made sure I didn't forget. In my dreams, Marcy called out for help, her voice echoing through the endless aisles, and I was always too late. Months passed. The store reopened with a new staff, new manager, new security system. For a while, the local news carried stories about safety policies and holiday crime spikes. Then the coverage stopped. But he never stopped. At least not in my mind. The police assured me the man was likely a drifter, someone passing through town, someone who'd moved on by now. It's unlikely he'll ever return, they said, but their voices lacked conviction. I started seeing him everywhere. At the gas station, standing too close. At the grocery store, lingering near the checkout line. Once I thought I spotted him across the street from my apartment, his figure silhouetted against a street lamp. But every time I looked again, he was gone. I told myself it was my imagination, trauma playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. The following December, I did everything I could to avoid the holiday. No lights, no tree, no cheery music to remind me of what I'd lost. Still, the date loomed like a storm cloud. On Christmas Eve, I stayed home, locked every door, closed every curtain, and sat in the dark with a bat resting across my lap. But darkness has a way of amplifying fear. Around 10 p.m., I heard it. A knock at the door. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect from a neighbor or a caroler. It was deliberate, heavy. I froze, my grip on the bat tightening. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. I inched toward the peephole, my heart hammering in my chest. When I looked through, there was no one there. I stepped back, every nerve in my body on edge. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. The cops didn't take me seriously. "Probably kids messing around," one of them said, not bothering to hide his smirk. But I knew better. After that night, the calls started. At first I thought they were spam, random numbers that hung up the moment I answered. But then one of them left a voicemail. It was a single word, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize but couldn't forget. Run. For years I lived like a fugitive, moved twice, changed my phone number again. I kept my guard up, avoiding public places, always glancing over my shoulder. But the thing about fear is that it wears you down. Eventually, you start convincing yourself that maybe it's all in your head. Last Christmas, I decided to visit my family for the first time in years. It felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. One night of normalcy after years of paranoia. I almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. That is, until I saw the gift. It was sitting on the front porch when I arrived. A small box, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a red ribbon. No tag. No markings. I thought it was from one of the neighbors, a kind gesture for the holidays. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside was a single item, Marcy's name tag. I dropped the box, stumbling back as if it had burned me. The name tag clattered to the ground, the letters glinting in the fading sunlight. I looked around, but the street was empty. I wanted to call the police, to scream for help, but a part of me knew it was pointless. Instead, I picked up the name tag, my fingers trembling, and turned it over. There was something etched into the back, something that hadn't been there before. 3 words. See you soon. Some people say fear is a survival mechanism, a way for your brain to protect you from danger. But what happens when the danger is constant? When there's no escaping it? No moving on? That man took more than Marcy's life that night. He took my peace of mind, my sense of safety. And I know he's still out there, because sometimes late at night I still hear it. And I know one day I'll have to answer. I couldn't sleep after finding Marcy's name tag. The words, "See you soon," haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured his face, his smirk, his cold, calculating eyes. The next morning, I went to the police station. This time, I didn't take no for an answer. I showed them the box, the name tag, and the inscription on the back. I demanded they take it seriously. To my surprise, they did. A detective named Harper listened carefully, asking questions no one had bothered to ask before. Was the box cold when you picked it up? Did you notice any footprints nearby? His questions felt sharp, precise, like scalpels cutting into the truth. It's possible he left fingerprints, Harper said. We'll need to process this. The next few days were agonizing. The police took the box as evidence, along with the name tag and ribbon. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone in this nightmare. But with every passing day, the fear grew. What if they didn't find anything? What if he was still out there, watching, waiting? Then a week later, Harper called. "We got a hit," he said. It turned out the man wasn't as careful as I thought. He'd left partial prints on the ribbon and the edge of the box, enough for the police to identify him. Richard Elkins, a drifter with a long history of violent crimes. He's been moving around the state for years, Harper explained. Mostly small towns, keeping a low profile. But this time, he slipped up. They tracked him to an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that screamed isolation. Overgrown weeds, boarded-up windows, and a sagging roof. I wasn't there for the raid, but Harper filled me in later. "He put up a fight," he said, his voice grim. "We found a knife matching the description you gave us. And other things." I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. A week later, Harper asked if I'd be willing to come to the station. "We need you to make a positive ID," he said. When I walked into the room, my legs nearly gave out. There he was, sitting on the other side of the glass, shackled to the table. He looked older than I remembered, his face weathered and lined, but the eyes were the same. Cold, unfeeling. "That's him," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Harper nodded. "We've got enough evidence to keep him locked up for good. He won't hurt anyone else." You'd think I would have felt relief, but I didn't. Not right away. It took time for the reality to sink in, for the fear to fade. For years, I'd lived under the shadow of that night, convinced he'd come back to finish what he started. Knowing he was behind bars didn't erase the trauma, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I still think about Marcy, especially around Christmas. I think about how brave she was, how she tried to protect me. This year, for the first time in over a decade, I visited her grave. I brought a wreath and laid it gently against the headstone. "I'm sorry," I whispered. But he's gone now. He can't hurt anyone else. As I walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Richard Elkins was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His trial revealed a string of unsolved crimes across multiple states, each one more horrifying than the last. The media called him the Drifter. But to me, he was just a monster. And now finally that monster was caged.